Sawadee Kap. Hello and welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha. Today is our Pali Canon and English study group, and we're studying Volume 12, which is titled The Lowly Arts. This class is going to be exploring chapters 41 through 50, and the way that we do this program is I invite students who are in Zoom to be able to read a chapter from the book. I'll share some teachings on that, and then I'm going to open up to any and all questions that students might have. Whether you're in Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, you can ask your questions by putting those into the comment section. And if you're in Zoom, you can electronically raise your hand and ask any questions that way, or even volunteer to read by just unmuting your microphone. So welcome to all of you, whether you're joining for the first time or you're joining regularly. If there's anyone who's in Zoom who would like to read this first chapter, you're more than welcome to. Just let me know. Okay, Pat and Samantha. All right, go ahead, guys.
There it is. A misunderstanding regarding listening to the Great Birth Sermon. An Arahant, fully enlightened Buddha named Maitreya by the words of the Buddha. The words of the Buddha in the Pali Canon illustrates the arising of an Arahant, fully enlightened Buddha named Maitreya, that states, "And in that time of the people with an 80,000-year lifespan, there will arise in a world a fortunate one, an Arahant, fully enlightened Buddha named Maitreya, endowed with wisdom and conduct, a well-farer, knower of the worlds, incomparable trainer of men to be tamed, teacher of gods and humans, enlightened and fortunate, just as I am now. He will thoroughly know, having realized it by his own experience, and proclaim this universe with its heavenly beings and Maras and Brahmas, its ascetics and Brahmins, and this generation with its princes and people, just as I do now. He will teach the teachings, lovely in its beginning, lovely in its middle, lovely in its ending, in the spirit and in the letter, and proclaim, just as I do now, the holy life in its fullness and purity. He will be attended by a company of thousands of monks, just as I am attended by a company of hundreds." This was all the words of the Buddha mentioned in the Pali Canon regarding the Arahant, fully enlightened Buddha named Maitreya.
Okay, thank you, sir. So here in this book, Lowly Arts, there's going to be a few chapters here that we're going to be exploring where there's misunderstandings that are being shared about the teachings of the Buddha. Because the Buddha taught 2,500 years ago, and his teachings have been affected by impermanence, the gradual change that happens because all material things in the world, all conditioned objects are going to arise, change, and fade away. So while the natural laws themselves haven't changed, and what the Buddha actually taught is what needs to be learned and practiced in order to get to enlightenment, the books, the memories, people's understanding of those teachings, that's all impermanent. Those are conditioned. But the natural laws themselves aren't conditioned, so they don't change. So the idea is to be able to get as close to what the Buddha was teaching as possible, because that's what's going to help to lead to your awakening, that you can awaken to these natural laws. But because the Buddha taught 2,500 years ago, there's many misunderstandings in the world. In this book series and all the work that I do to share these teachings is to be able to help you guys to be able to understand what the Buddha actually taught. And then I invite you to not believe those teachings, but to learn them, examine them, investigate them, to reflect on them, to independently verify them, and then practice them so you can discover the truth for yourself and cultivate wisdom, awakening to this enlightened mental state. So we're going to see several chapters here where there's certain misunderstandings. And this is the first one here, that sometimes there's many misunderstandings in the world about this future Buddha that Gotama Buddha, the Buddha, talked about. This Buddha named Maitreya is predicted to arise in the future beyond the lifetime of the Buddha. What you see here is what Pat just read is what is in the Pali Canon. Not everything that the Buddha taught is in the Pali Canon, and not everything that is in the Pali Canon is what the Buddha actually taught. But what we have in the Pali Canon, which is the largest, most complete collection of the teachings of the Buddha, understanding that we're missing some things, this is what exists in the Pali Canon related to this being Maitreya. But you're going to see other books and other literature that is describing this Buddha in other ways. And it may or may not have actually come from the Buddha. But what we have here is understanding what the Buddha actually talked about. So we'll go through this, and then, of course, like always, I'll open up to questions that you guys have. So here the Buddha is saying that in the time of the people with a 80,000 year lifespan, what he means is from the time that Maitreya Buddha arises, that from that point forward, humanity is going to have another 80,000 years, because the Buddha knew that his teachings is what led to enlightenment, and that they would be shared far and wide all throughout the world. And eventually more and more people would get to enlightenment, to this peaceful and joyful mental state. But it wouldn't be during his lifetime, because the language that he spoke was only spoken in a very limited region of the world. So he didn't have the ability to share his teachings worldwide. But the Buddha knew that his teachings would reach the entire world. It would just be a matter of time, but it just wouldn't be during his lifetime. So from the time that Maitreya Buddha arises, that's the time that humanity has another 80,000 years to live. And Maitreya Buddha, if he does the work that he needs to do, and the people around Maitreya Buddha do the work that needs to be done, then the teachings would be restored back into the world in such a way that countless beings would be able to get to enlightenment, and those teachings would persevere all the way through the end of humanity, where countless people could get to enlightenment. If you can imagine countless people getting to the peace, calm, serenity, and contentedness that is the enlightened mental state, where there's joy in the mind, where beings are loving and kind and compassionate, where people are polite, kind, friendly, and respectful, more and more as countless beings get to this enlightened mental state, some people might describe this as heaven on earth. The Buddha never described it that way, but there's some people who might describe it that way. But we knew that this wasn't going to happen during the lifetime of the Buddha, so it's only now that we actually have that ability to be able to reach to this objective of having the teachings reach the entire world. Because now there's an international language like English, where these teachings can reach the entire world. Travel is much more easily accessible now than it was during the lifetime of the Buddha, where we can fly from one part of the world to the other in pretty much a day or two, where the Buddha didn't have that ability. And we have the ability to send information from one part of the earth to the other through the internet with just a click of a button, which didn't exist during the lifetime of the Buddha. So we're living during that time frame when it's possible for this to actually occur. So the Buddha predicted this new Buddha, Maitreya, which, by the way, the word Maitreya means loving kindness, because this new Buddha would have enormous amount of loving kindness, or a genuine interest in seeing all beings be well. That's what this Buddha would have, just like every Buddha, just like every enlightened being would have that. But that's one of the things that motivates a Buddha to actually share their teachings, is their deep loving kindness and their compassion for the world. So the Buddha talked about this being arising 2,500 years after his death. And of course, he's going through here and saying how this being is going to be endowed with wisdom, and there's a certain amount of moral conduct that this being is going to have, right? In order to get to enlightenment as a fully, perfectly enlightened Buddha, you would need to have deep wisdom and a certain moral conduct, which is the same moral conduct that you're teaching. And then a Buddha is an individual who's going to be training individuals, training human beings, and if heavenly beings would like to learn, they're able to learn as well. During the lifetime of the Buddha, they thought about the Buddha as an individual who could train gods and humans. I don't necessarily think of it that way, but I know that that's what was being taught during the lifetime of the Buddha. And then, of course, a Buddha is also referred to as a fortunate one, right? To have gotten to enlightenment by themselves and be able to be in a position to help all of humanity. And the Buddha says, just as I am now, right? So this individual Maitreya Buddha would be a Buddha just as Gotama Buddha was during his lifetime. Then we've got more detail here where he says he will thoroughly know, having realized it by his own experience, right? That's what is one of the first criteria of what makes a Buddha, is that they get to enlightenment by themselves without the help of any teachers or any guides. And this individual will proclaim this universe, right? Meaning that this enlightened being, this Buddha, would understand the natural laws. That's what it means by proclaim this universe, like explain this universe, explain the natural laws to countless beings. And here he says, with its heavenly beings, Maras, Brahmas, right? So I think you guys know what these things are. Heavenly beings are the beings in the formless realm. Mara is the being that is a formless being that is interested in causing calamity in the world. Brahmas are thought to be gods. During the lifetime of the Buddha, they talked about many different gods. And then, of course, aesthetics and Brahmins that existed during the lifetime of the Buddha. These are things that exist now too. So this new being would be able to explain all these things and explain to you what all these things are. In this generation, with its princes and people, right, we'll be able to explain those kinds of things too. Again, just as I do now. But then what the Buddha says is this individual will have teachings that are lovely in the beginning, middle, and end. Essentially, they will be able to be explained in a way that people would understand them. They're not going to be very complicated and convoluted and difficult to understand. They're going to be very lovely, meaning easy to understand, so that the average person will be able to understand them and practice the teachings. And then he talks about proclaiming this holy life in its fullness and purity. That's the path to enlightenment. That's how to purify the mind, that a Buddha would be able to explain how to do that. And then the Buddha says he will be attended by a company of thousands of monks, just as I am attended by a company of hundreds. Essentially, what he's saying is Maitreya Buddha will have many more students and help many more people to enlightenment, more so than the Buddha himself. Because the Buddha himself, again, he lived in a certain region of the world that they spoke a certain language, and there was only a certain number of people that understood that language. But Maitreya Buddha, coming into the world the way it is today, would have much more facilities available to them to be able to share the teachings. Again, there's the English language, which today is spoken by over 1 billion people, and that's growing all the time. There's the ability to have books and nowadays videos, podcasts, things like this that could be shared far and wide, so that even when Maitreya isn't physically present, people could actually be learning. Where during the lifetime of the Buddha, he had to be physically present and you had to be next to the Buddha in order to be able to learn his teachings. And again, travel and sending teachings throughout the internet nowadays is much more easily accessible. So the Buddha in his lifetime 2,500 years ago is saying, yeah, Maitreya Buddha is going to have many more students and essentially help many more people to enlightenment than even he did, because of these criteria that exist. So there's other things out there related to Maitreya Buddha that people talk about, but it's just not in the Pali Canon. And this particular chapter goes into some other things that people talk about. And it's explaining how these things aren't true and these are misunderstandings. So you guys might have read this prior to class, and we can talk about it if you like, but I'm not going to read through it or have anybody read through it because it's right there available for you guys. What's important is to just understand that the Buddha himself, Gotama Buddha, did mention about this new Buddha that would arise in the world. And the goal of this Buddha would be to restore the teachings into the world in such a way that they can shine during that person's lifetime and long afterwards, so that more and more people would be able to get to enlightenment. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this chapter. Remember, you can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. So it looks like Vibhav has a question. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, David. I was just wondering, given that there is so much suffering or discontentedness in the world, like the last known Buddha was 2,500 years ago, and now Maitreya Buddha is predicted to come. Like, why are there not more Buddhas like coming, or even in this time frame or after that? Like, given the amount of suffering or discontentedness in this world.
Sure.
Like, I think it looks like the world needs it more, like what to do with more Buddhas around.
Yeah. So a Buddha is very rare in the world. The last one that the world's currently aware of existed over 2,500 years ago. And as you guys heard in all the different classes that I share, there's those 3 criteria, is that they get to enlightenment by themselves without the help of any teachers or guides. They dedicate the rest of their life to sharing their independently discovered teachings with countless people, and countless people get to enlightenment during that person's lifetime. And then they preserve their teachings in such a way that countless more people will get to enlightenment after their death. And there's other criteria as well. One of those criteria is that a person who's going to become a Buddha has a deep, profound memory, that they can remember things in countless detail, from their current life and their past lives too. And they accumulate all that wisdom to be able to get to enlightenment in their last life. The ability for somebody to do that is very rare in the world. And when Gotama Buddha existed 2,500 years ago, the people around him learned and practiced the teachings. And then shortly after, there was plenty of people for 500 years that were getting to enlightenment. But then his teachings slowly decline. Sometimes what needs to happen is the world has to see its dire straits and how difficult things really are without teachings like this in order for people to really appreciate them. It's kind of like if you have ice cream in your house all the time, you get to the point where you just kind of ignore it. It's just kind of there sitting in the freezer. Whereas if you have ice cream in your house like once a month, once every 2 or 3 months, it's like, oh, wow, we've got ice cream in the house. Let's, go taste this ice cream and see what it's all about. Right. So it's kind of the same thing with the Buddha, is that if there was a Buddha in the world continuously all the time, it would be like people would almost, ignore this situation rather than, oh, wow, there's this particular period of time where a Buddha exists in the world. And now let's pay attention to that. And of course, during the lifetime of a Buddha, not everyone's going to know that a Buddha exists in the world. But, by the time that they die, they will know. So like right now, we know that Gotama Buddha for sure was an actual Buddha. But during his lifetime, there were plenty of people who didn't realize he was a Buddha. I would suspect that there was probably a lot more people that maybe even got to enlightenment after his death than even during his life. Because one of the things that happens at the death of a Buddha is there's usually a small earthquake that shakes the world, and it will be a signal for the people who are still alive that this person is actually a Buddha. Because there's all these other indications while they're alive, but not everybody clues into those. But at the time of the death, the exact moment of the death of a Buddha, the earth will shake. And then that's an indication for people to know that this person's a Buddha. And now people will take his teachings even more serious. So I suspect that 500 years after the death of the Buddha, even more people got to enlightenment during that period of time than maybe even during his lifetime, perhaps. So if we had a Buddha in the world continuously, it would almost be like ignored. I mean, we can look at someone like the Dalai Lama, right? Like he's there and people know that he's there, or like the Pope, people know that the Pope is there, but people don't really pay attention so much to what these people are doing on a day-to-day basis. But if a Buddha comes into the world and people know how rare it is, I suspect people will pay much more attention to that. But again, people knowing that a Buddha exists in the world is also uncommon, and not everybody's going to know that a Buddha exists in the world. But once that person dies, now people are going to pay a lot of attention to his teachings.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, it looks like Leo has a question. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, David. I wanted to ask if will all beings get to enlightenment in this 80,000 years period? And was it that in 80,000 years the world collapses? Or is it just that everybody, all humans are alive? Or was it?
I didn't understand the second part of your question, but let me answer the first part first. Is that whether everybody gets to enlightenment or not is a decision for each individual person. We wouldn't be able to predict that because it's individual decisions from individual people that's going to determine whether they actually get to enlightenment or not. It's not up to a Buddha to know or even decide whether all those people will get to enlightenment, because each individual person needs to decide for themselves that they're interested in attaining enlightenment. A Buddha's teachings will shine in the world and be made available to countless people to be able to get to enlightenment, but whether they choose to do that or not is a decision for each individual to make.
Because there are so many beings in the world, right? And some beings, I think the Buddha said that need like 500 eons in a realm to get to another realm. And then it's so rare to get into the human realm. So I couldn't imagine that all beings have the possibility to get to enlightenment.
It's not that it takes 500 eons for every single birth. There's some existences in the heavenly realm that can take upwards of that amount of time, but that's not the case for every existence. So in the animal existences, for example, people can bounce around, or beings can bounce around in that realm continuously. Getting into the human realm, it's very rare for someone to come into the human realm, but you can be reborn into the human realm. I've seen as short as 500 years or as long as 2,000 years, and that's actually very minimal compared to the length of an eon. So it's possible for beings to come into the human world during that 80,000 year time frame and get to enlightenment. But whether people choose to actually get to enlightenment or not is up to them. It's a decision for them to make. And the goal of a Buddha would be to have their teaching shine in the world in such a way that they're available as people are coming into the world. But then whether someone chooses to learn and practice is a decision for them to make.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, let me see if I have any questions on YouTube or Facebook. Oh, it looks like Yihang has a question. Go ahead, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you, Teacher David. And at the beginning of this chapter, that in that time of the people within 80,000 year lifespan, I'm still confused. Is that 80,000 year lifespan is the lifespan of the people living at that time, or is the lifespan that humanity as a whole still have?
Yeah, it's not possible for one human being to live for 80,000 years. So this is referring to all of humanity, that from the time of the arising of Maitreya, that all of humanity will last for another 80,000 years. And at the end of that 80,000 years, humanity will no longer exist because we are impermanent. Oftentimes people can't imagine humans not existing in this world, and people oftentimes hold on, but humanity is impermanent. We're not going to be on this planet permanently. And this is the time frame that I know of that is the length of time that humanity has from the arising of Maitreya Buddha.
Thank you, Teacher David.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, I don't see any questions anywhere else. So we'll move on to these next chapters. We actually don't need to read each one of these next chapters. Oh, it looks like Yusuf has a question. Go ahead, sir.
About reading.
Oh, okay. Samantha volunteered to read too. So maybe I'll come to you, Yusuf, after Samantha. So let me just explain these chapters, because these aren't actually the words of the Buddha. So there's not a need for us to really read them. But if you've read them, then you know what they say, that this here is essentially helping you to be able to see this misunderstanding as it relates to this ritual of pouring out water to be able to transfer merit. Remember, merit is when you're practicing generosity in order to help other people get access to the teachings of the Buddha. And what that's doing for you is it's helping you to enhance the quality of your mind, where you're training your mind to let go and not be selfish, right? So that you're maybe have gotten to a point where you've seen significant improvement to your mind and your life, and you would like other people to get access to the teachings. And that's where practicing generosity, which produces merit, wholesome karma, to be able to allow your mind to let go and practice generosity, but also have others get access to the teachings. So sometimes when people are doing this, there's a misunderstanding that you can somehow transfer your merit to somebody else. Typically, they're talking about dead relatives. But if you understand what the true benefit of practicing merit is, which is to enhance the quality of your mind and for other people to get access to the teachings, you understand that you can't transfer that benefit to somebody else. And if you understand the natural law of karma, that the Buddha talks about, you are the owner of your karma, the heir of your karma, you have karma as your relative, as your resort. Whatever karma you do, either wholesome or unwholesome, you are its heirs, meaning that you're the one who produces karma. You can't produce karma for anybody else. Then you understand transferring merit to somebody else, because merit is just wholesome karma, essentially. At the end of the day, you can't transfer that to anybody else. But this particular chapter tracks down where that misunderstanding comes from, because it's so pervasive in the world. And as long as people continue to think this way and believe these kinds of things, then they're not going to be able to focus on the real practice of what it takes to be able to get to enlightenment. So by helping people understand what the misunderstandings are, it helps them to understand the path to enlightenment more directly, so that then they can actually learn and practice and train their mind to get to enlightenment. So this is just helping to track down where that misunderstanding comes from and helping people to be able to understand that. And this pretty much tracks it down to a particular book and a certain literature that existed in the past. Do you guys have any questions on this one? Okay, Yusuf, go ahead, sir.
What is that in the below, from the above story, people have believed that it's about Maitreya. No, I think it's lagged. My screen is lagged. There is no matriya here, right? Yeah, there is no matriya here. My screen is lagged.
Okay. All right. Let me see if we have any questions anywhere. I don't see those. So same thing with this next one. There's a misunderstanding that there's no words of the Buddha here, so we don't have to read this. But it's helpful for you to read it in terms of outside of class. We're just not reading it in class, right? This is a misunderstanding regarding holy water. Sometimes people think that ordained practitioners can somehow get a bowl of water and turn it into holy water, and now you sprinkle it on people and that's going to benefit them, or you sprinkle it on your car or a house or something like this. These kinds of things were being practiced during the lifetime of the Buddha, and he explained how this is unwise and he doesn't do these kinds of things, and this is promoting wrong view. If you remember back to the very beginning of this book when he was describing lowly arts, this was one of the lowly arts that existed during his lifetime that he explained that he doesn't practice because it promotes wrong view. Because if people thought that they could just go to a building and get some water sprinkled on them from somebody and their life was going to get better, that means they're not understanding the real problem, which is the lack of wisdom in the mind, and they need to train the mind and purify the mind. And think about how much ego it must take from a human being to think that they can take water out of a faucet, they can chant over this water, drip some wax into the bowl, and do other things. And now that water is somehow special, and it's holy water now. And now I can sprinkle that water on people, and they're going to somehow miraculously experience some kind of beneficial result. That takes an enormous amount of conceit in the mind to be able to do that. So the Buddha taught that it promotes wrong view. And now you can see these other unfortunate things that it leads somebody astray off the path to enlightenment, and they're not actually practicing the true things that they need to practice in order to be able to get to enlightenment. So let me know if you guys have any questions on this here. Okay, go ahead, Yusuf.
Teacher, how is it conceitful, what you described here?
So conceit would be like arrogance and pride and boastfulness, thinking that you're above people or, of course, below people. So if I thought that I could take some water and I could drip some, this is what they do, is they drip wax into the bowl of water and they chant over it. If I thought that I had the power, somehow I'm a special person, I'm different than you, Yusuf, I have this special power that I can somehow chant over this water and drip some candle wax into it, and now it's like this special holy water that is sacred and has these special powers, and now I can take this water and I can sprinkle it on people and they're going to benefit from that. That takes a lot of arrogance and thinking of yourself as being above people to be able to think that you're actually able to do that kind of thing. And of course, this comes from the mind's lack of wisdom or ignorance, but there's a certain amount of ego or conceit in there to be able to think that one person could do that, to think that one person could bless another person, right? This is essentially what they're thinking, is that they're blessing somebody else. That means somehow that I'm special, that you can't improve your life for yourself. You need to come to me in order to get this special water. That is putting yourself above other people and looking down on others, like somehow you've been sanctified as being a person who can do this kind of thing. And this is coming from the mind's ego.
So what you described seems like conceitful, but some religious people use like Bible or Quran, like read some pages of it on water to make the water holy. That would not necessarily mean they are conceitful by what they did, right?
In my opinion, if somebody is doing this kind of thing, they have conceit in their mind, because there's nothing that you can read out of a book that's going to make this water special. You know, like, why is it that I would think that I have the ability to read out of the Bible or out of the Quran, and somehow this water is going to be transformed into some kind of holy water? It's just water. At the end of the day, it's H2O. That's all it is. This is part of the mind's lack of wisdom or ignorance, the rites and rituals and ceremonies and worship, that the mind is in this delusion, thinking that somehow you can make this water special, and now you'll sprinkle it on people and they're going to get some kind of benefit from that. The only benefit they're getting is they're getting wet. That's it. And maybe if they're hot, it's going to help them cool down. You know, that's a benefit that they might be getting. But in terms of any kind of like benefit in terms of, cultivating wisdom or creating improvement in your day-to-day life, There's none of that. And if I was to choose to do that, not only is there ego and arrogance in the mind, this conceit and arrogance, but there's also wrong view in the mind. And the Buddha taught that anybody who has wrong view, when they die, they're going to be reborn in the hell realm or the animal realm. Because having wrong view would be to not truly understand what is causing the difficulties and struggles in your mind, that it's craving, desire, attachment, that an individual doesn't understand the Four Noble Truths. And if I was out there, propagating wrong view, it's harmful for my mind and countless other people. And it would be unwise to think that, you could read something out of a book and somehow, make this water special. That comes from the mind's ego.
Teacher, isn't that like a big statement to say that people are gonna be reborn in hell if they had wrong view before they die? Because I can say 95% of people has wrong view.
I would say it's even higher percentage than that. But yeah, that's what the Buddha shares, is that if somebody has wrong view when they die, they would be reborn in the hell realm or the animal realm.
So no matter what I do, if I had wrong, no matter what I do of generosity and right speech and this kind of stuff, I would be reborn in hell if I had wrong view.
Well, if you're practicing generosity and right speech, then it seems that you would probably understand right view to a certain degree, right? Because that's the whole reason why you're practicing those things.
So it's not necessarily for me to fully understand right view. If understanding some parts of it would maybe take me away from hell.
So the Buddha describes in his teachings, which we've already seen in this program many times, that this is the thing that would lead to rebirth in the hell realm or the animal realm, is to have wrong view. And of course, there's other ways too, but that is part of that. And remember, these realms aren't permanent. An individual does have the opportunity to get back into other realms, but he describes having wrong view, that somebody would be reborn in hell in the animal realm.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
All right. So let me see if we have any questions anywhere. I don't see that. So now let's move to this next one, which is misunderstandings regarding the benefits of reciting teachings. This has to do with chanting and mantras. Again, we don't have any words of the Buddha here, but this is something that we can talk about and help you guys to be able to understand. And I think many of you already do understand, because I teach this in the group learning program and many of the other foundational classes that I teach, is that there's nothing special about chanting that's going to magically lead to any kind of benefits or results in terms of getting to enlightenment or bringing your boyfriend or girlfriend back to you or producing enlightenment or anything like that. But there's these misunderstandings that exist based on impermanence and people having changed the Buddhist teachings, that they think that somehow chanting is going to lead to some mystical or magical benefit. You see this in countless places across the world. But the Buddha used chanting as a way to help his students remember teachings. It was just a learning tool or a learning device. It was never thought by the Buddha to be any kind of rite, ritual, ceremony, worship, or prayer, or anything like that. That's not how the Buddha actually taught chanting. It was used as a learning tool, or as a learning device. But because a lot of people don't understand the words that are being chanted, it's kind of like the things that are least known become more mystical and magical. It's kind of like the less you know about something, the more mystical and magical it becomes. So because this language of Pali and others are kind of old and people don't really know what they're chanting anymore to a large degree, they maybe think that there's some kind of mystical or magical effect with this. And this is, once again, tracing in the various resources that are available throughout history where this misunderstanding comes from, so that you can understand that it is a misunderstanding. And this is helpful to be able to get you more oriented with what is the true path to enlightenment. Chanting is one of the things that during the lifetime of the Buddha, you had to chant in order to be able to get to enlightenment. If you didn't know how to chant during the lifetime of the Buddha, you had no ability to remember the teachings and commit them to your memory. So reciting the teachings orally through chanting was needed in order to be able to get to enlightenment. But the Buddha knew that that wouldn't be needed long term, that things would change, because he didn't make it part of the core path to enlightenment. So like the Eightfold Path, there is no factor called right chanting. That's how you know that chanting isn't part of the core path to enlightenment. It's the one thing that I teach, that if you didn't chant, you would still be able to get to enlightenment. But there's other benefits that we know of that chanting does bring about, that you would need to produce those benefits, but you don't necessarily have to do it with chanting. So today we have books and audiobooks, videos, podcasts, things like this that you can use in order to absorb the teachings, remember them, and study them, where in the lifetime of the Buddha, they didn't have those. So that's where the chanting came in. But nowadays, we're so far away from that time frame that people don't understand what the Buddha actually taught. So it takes on this mystical or magical approach. And it's important to be able to see that that's not true, because this is a thought that's propagated in the world quite extensively. You'll see lots of people chanting for an enormous amounts of time, sometimes an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. They will just chant and chant and chant and chant and chant, thinking that this is like a prayer to the Buddha, asking the Buddha to maybe somehow do something for them. And the more that you see this is untrue, it's going to help you to understand what is the true path to enlightenment, and you can focus on the true path rather than these kinds of things. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this chapter. Remember, you can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. So it looks like Yusuf has a question. Go ahead, sir.
I have encountered some practitioners that says if you were to recite or chant the name of a certain Buddha 3 times a day, you will get to heaven eventually. So it's funny to see such a doubt.
Well, remember, the goal of the teachings of the Buddha isn't to get to heaven. That's not the ultimate goal. You're still in the cycle of rebirth. You still need to get to enlightenment. So right away, you can see that that's not true. And you can see that there's no part of the teachings of the Buddha where he's teaching chanting as part of your rebirth and getting to some other realm. That's not what he actually taught. So it's unfortunate that people think that way, but that's the whole reason why this is in this book series. And I even have this in volume 1 as well, because it's such a big misunderstanding. I put it in volume 1 as well, so that people more and more can see what the true teachings are. Okay, it looks like Samantha has a question. Go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you. I'm not sure if you would know the answer to this, but in the temples nowadays, in modern times, there's, oftentimes 2 or 3 hours, as you said, of chanting. Do you know if they're chanting teachings or if they're doing the chanting as more of a blessing or a prayer or a thank you?
I suspect you have a combination of all of those things going on. It's going to be different from temple to temple, because they all do things differently. And they usually have a book of chants that they do. In some cases, I see they're chanting teachings. In other cases, it might be even like a folk story or something like that. In other cases, it might be like this blessing that they're thinking that they're blessing the public or asking for the Buddha to change things for them. There's all kinds of different misunderstandings like that. So you're going to see a whole plethora from different people in all of those different areas that you talked about and more.
Okay, this seems like such a basic thing that, well, I guess not all practitioners read the Pali Canon, but this just seems very basic to me, that most people who are in a position of teaching Buddhism or the Buddhist teachings, that they would know this.
Yeah, if somebody studied the original teachings of the Buddha, they would. But this is actually the prevailing view in the world, that 98%, probably 99% of the places you're going to see them constantly chanting, thinking that that's what Buddhism is all about, because they haven't studied the true teachings. And the highest, most ultimate truth of the Buddha, as you know, is dependent origination. And it makes it very clear for you what is the actual problem and then how to solve that, right? Which is the ignorance or the unknowing of true reality and cultivation of wisdom. And I teach that from the very beginning of every single class that I pretty much start with students. But unfortunately, because there's so many misunderstandings in the world and people have gotten more and more to belief rather than cultivation of wisdom, they don't even understand that's the ultimate goal, is to cultivate wisdom. And if you grew up this way, like say you were in remote Thailand and you grew up in a village where there's just your grandparents, your aunts and uncles, your mom and dad, and all the monks and elders of the village are doing these chanting, you would think that that's what Buddhism is because you have no other perspective than what you grew up with. So it's just unfortunate that these things exist, but this is the nature of impermanence. And for someone like me, I'm interested in seeing more and more people get to enlightenment. So that's why I share these things. And I always share these things without any kind of, degrading of people or looking down on them, because I once used to do these things too, right? I used to make holy water. I used to sprinkle holy water on people. This was long before I was living here in Chiang Mai, but I used to do these things. I used to think that you could transfer the benefits of your merit to other people and these other things. So, I've done all these things and I see that they don't lead to improvement to the condition of the mind in one's life. And that's how I know that it's so important to make this clear, because not only do I know that those things are misunderstandings, but I know that the true teachings of the Buddha actually indeed lead to this enlightened mental state. And I'm more and more interested in seeing people experience that. So that's why it's helpful to talk about these misunderstandings. But an individual needs to decide for themselves that they're interested in understanding this, because sometimes people are clinging onto something like craving so tightly that they're unwilling to even consider what the Buddha actually taught. Because let's just say you're been ordained for 30, 40, maybe 50 years since you were like really early in life, and you've been sprinkling water on people in your temple, and you're collecting money from the community to do these ceremonies and stuff like this. If you've been doing that for any amount of time, even a few months or years, some of these ordained practitioners have been doing this for 20, 30, 40 years. It takes a whole lot of, elimination of clinging and craving. And that takes the elimination of personal existence view and conceit to be able to get to the point where you can now change what you're doing, because you've been, propagating these false truths in your community and sharing this, chanting and sprinkling water on people and ceremonies and collecting money from them for so long. If you started all of a sudden sharing the true teachings of the Buddha, again, an individual would have to have eliminated a certain amount of personal existence view and conceit and central desire to be able to do this, but they'll never actually do that as long as they're chanting and using holy water. But now to go out into your community and say, oh, I got it wrong. The last 30 years, 40 years, I've been collecting money from you guys and doing all of this stuff, and I haven't been doing what is wise and what the Buddha actually taught. It takes a very strong individual to be willing to stand up and actually do that. And this is why many people who are involved in these kind of things, not just ordained practitioners, but household practitioners, they continue to hold on to what they're doing, because it also allows the mind to be complacent to a certain degree, that in order to get into the true teachings of the Buddha, there's a certain amount of work that needs to be done in order to be able to do that. But the first thing that the mind needs to do is practice that intention of renunciation, that second factor of the Eightfold Path, where it's willing to let go and give up its false ideas, its false beliefs, its false opinions, and false views. But the mind is typically unwilling to do that because in the unenlightened state, it's holding on. And it does have personal existence view really strongly. And it does have central desire. And it does have conceit. So oftentimes these people are causing themselves to be trapped and stuck, that they're unwilling to let go, see the truth, and now make changes to improve, which would be for their benefit and the benefit of countless people. But oftentimes people just stay stuck in these things. And while it is seeming very straightforward and very apparent to you, that's because you've kind of been brought up with the true teachings of the Buddha. So it makes sense to you. But for somebody who hasn't been brought up that way, it's not so clear and apparent.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and then I'll just add, this is the reason why we have such compassion, right? Concern for the misfortune of others, and loving kindness, which is the genuine interest in seeing all beings be well, and motivates us to be able to learn and practice the true teachings, because as more people discover that, that's what's going to ultimately potentially provide the opportunity for them to get the help that they need. Okay, I don't see any questions anywhere else. So if we'd like to pick it up with the reading, this next chapter, Samantha, I think you were volunteered to read after Pat.
Okay, thank you. Reside with the teachings as your refuge. But have I not already declared, Ananda, that we must be parted, separated, and severed from all who are dear and agreeable to us? How, Ananda, is it to be obtained here? May what is born come to be, conditioned and subject to disintegration, not disintegrate. That is impossible. Therefore, Ananda, reside with yourselves as your own island, with yourselves as your own refuge, with no other refuge. Reside with the teachings as your island, with the teachings as your refuge, with no other refuge. And how, Ananda, does a monk reside with himself as his own island, with himself as his own refuge, with no other refuge, with the teachings as his island, with the teachings as his refuge, with no other refuge? Here, Ananda, a monk resides reflecting on the body as body. He resides reflecting on feelings as feelings. He resides reflecting on mind as mind. He resides reflecting on mental objects as mental objects, dedicated, clearly comprehending, mindful, having removed craving and displeasure in regard to the world. Those monks, Ananda, either now or after I am gone, who reside with themselves as their own island, with themselves as their own refuge, with no other refuge, who reside with the teachings as their island, with the teachings as their refuge, with no other refuge. It is these monks, Ananda, who will be for me greatest of those dedicated to the training.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. So here, this is actually a discourse that the Buddha gave prior to him dying. There was a period of time, 3 months before the Buddha was going to die, that he was alerting his students that he was going to be dying. This is how enlightened that he was, that he understood when he was going to be dying. And he gave his students a 3 months heads up, which is really wise for a Buddha to do, because if they know when they're going to die, their students obviously are not all enlightened by the time they die. So kind of giving them that 3 months of a heads up allows them to be able to get any remaining questions answered that they need prior to dying. And when the Buddha delivered his teaching to help them to understand he was about to die in 3 months, one of his closest students, Ananda, begged and pleaded with him not to die, because obviously he was attached to the Buddha, right? So then when Ananda was begging and pleading with the Buddha not to die, this is the discourse that the Buddha shared. He said, "But have I not already declared, Ananda, that we must be parted, separated, and severed from all who are dear and agreeable to us?" Right? This is reminding him of impermanence, right? Hasn't the Buddha already declared this? Hasn't he already taught this? Hasn't he already helped you to understand? And then he says, "How, Ananda, is it to be obtained here that may what is born come to be inconditioned and subject to disintegration, not disintegrate?" So the Buddha is talking about himself. He's saying, how could this body, which was born, came to be, it's conditioned, it's subject to disintegration, how could it not disintegrate? That is impossible, right? And he's helping Ananda to be able to see this. But then he goes on and he says, "Reside with yourself as your own island, with yourself as your own refuge, with the teachings as your refuge." What he means by refuge is he means protection. In terms of the way to protect your mind, it's to train your mind through the teachings of the Buddha. When your mind is unenlightened, it's not protected. There's just a matter of time before some kind of contact that you experience is going to trigger one of your cravings, desires, attachments. And now the mind's going to become discontent. So the Buddha is describing use these teachings that I shared with you. That's what's actually going to protect your mind. Essentially, he gets to the point where he says, you don't need this body to be here in order to be able to learn and practice and get to enlightenment. So use the teachings themselves as your refuge, as your protection. It's unfortunate that sometimes people use this particular discourse thinking that they don't need a teacher in order to be able to get to enlightenment, where if you've seen all the other teachings of the Buddha, you can see where he talks about that you need a teacher. But here, sometimes people look at the teachings of the Buddha in isolation, and they think that what he was saying is you don't need a teacher. Well, if that was the case, the Buddha would have never spent 45 years sharing his teachings. He would have gotten to enlightenment and been like, well, I got to enlightenment by yourself. Have fun, guys. See you later. Right? But he didn't do that. But instead, what he's saying is, hey, use these teachings to be the thing that guides you while I'm gone and I'm no longer here. And then he says, okay, how do you do that? How do you use these teachings in order to be able to get you to this point where your mind's protected and has this refuge? Then he talks about the 4 foundations of mindfulness. There are no secrets related to the path to enlightenment. Everything is available for you to be able to learn and understand and get guidance from a teacher of how to do that. There are no secrets about the path to enlightenment. But if there's one thing that is like the real linchpin, the thing that is really going to transform your mind, it's the 4 foundations of mindfulness. If you didn't understand this, you would have no ability to get to enlightenment whatsoever. But we could say the same thing about the 5 precepts or right speech or anything like that. But in terms of like the real linchpin, the real thing that really transforms the mind, it's the 4 foundations of mindfulness, where you understand that you need to be aware of the bodily sensations and cut off and let go there before the mind experiences the feeling. Because as long as you keep allowing the mind to experience the feeling, it's just going to stay wired that way. So you need to get better and better at spotting the bodily sensations arising and cutting off and letting go there. And you guys have learned this in different classes and courses and retreats that I share. So you need to be able to really clue into this, because if you keep allowing the mind to experience the feelings, you're not going to be able to transform the mind. But understanding that it can oftentimes take multiple years just to get to the point where you can spot the discontentedness arising as a bodily sensation every single time and cut off and let go there. If you're able to do that, you can get to the point where if you're able to spot the bodily sensations that are arising due to craving, desire, attachment in the mind and let it go there every single time, you're about 1 to 3 years away from enlightenment at that point, because you will transform your mind. But if you didn't understand to apply right effort and cut off at the bodily sensations, your mind's just going to keep farming the feeling. You'll hear this in some places. They will say, oh, welcome the feelings in, be one with the feelings, look at the feelings, observe the feelings, feel the feelings. There's no problem with the feelings. Let the mind experience this. This is not true at all. If you continue to allow the mind to do that, it's just going to stay wired to keep experiencing these feelings over and over and over again. But it's the transformation of the mind by cutting off and letting go at the bodily sensations that's going to transform the mind, because that's prior to the mind ever forming the conditioned feeling. Because what you're trying to do is stop the mind, retrain it, transform it from forming this conditioned feeling. So what the 4 foundations of mindfulness are doing is it's alerting you to the 4 objects that you need to be able to be aware of with your awareness of mind. And it's also explaining the life cycle that your discontentedness is going to take, that it's first going to arise as a bodily sensation. It's then going to be a feeling. It's then going to affect the condition of your mind. And then it's going to feed these mental objects. The mental objects are the deeply rooted containers in the mind, the 10 fetters. You're going to need to know what these fetters are, the symptoms of them, how to eliminate them, and how to know that you've actually eliminated them. And by understanding these 4 foundations of mindfulness, you can then apply right effort at the bodily sensations, cutting off and cutting off and cutting off and cutting off. And it's important to keep in mind that you're not repressing your feelings or suppressing them. You're actually cutting it off before it ever becomes a feeling. And I give you guys the guidance of explaining how this looks in day-to-day life. That if you were watching the news and you noticed that the arising bodily sensations were arising, and you felt the tingling in the body, the tightening in the throat, the heat in the face, the pressure in the skull, you know that this is the bodily sensation associated with arising discontentedness. And you know what's going to happen next is the mind's going to form the feeling. So rather than just sit there and dwell in that and allow the mind to form this feeling, what I encourage students to do is redirect the mind, cut off the news, go outside for a walk, go for a bike ride, go get a glass of water from the kitchen. This is redirecting the mind. And you would do this for a period of time during your training where your mind is getting triggered. And then if you do this enough, eventually you'll be able to just sit there and watch the news and understand what's going on in the world, but you won't be angry. You won't be frustrated. You won't have annoyance and guilt and shame and fear and all these other discontent feelings. But you need to go through this period of time where you're training your mind to eliminate the craving, desire, attachments. But you'll never do that if you keep allowing the mind to experience the conditioned feeling. So if you guys have questions on these 4 foundations of mindfulness, let me know, because this is a real pivotal part of the path to enlightenment. If you didn't understand this, your mind would just keep experiencing the feelings over and over and over again. So the Buddha here then once again just talks about how that you can use these teachings as your own refuge, because you're going to need to be able to see the arising of discontentedness in the mind. That a teacher can help you to understand these things. We can help you gain the wisdom and understanding of the path to enlightenment. But ultimately, you need to be the one who does the work in order to be able to get to enlightenment. And the Buddha describes that using the teachings as your refuge, then during his life and afterwards, those people are the ones who are the most dedicated. Now, the Buddha teaches about how complacency on the path to enlightenment, or we could call this laziness, is not going to produce beneficial results in your growth and development on the path to enlightenment. Because we can understand complacency like choosing not to meditate, choosing not to come to classes, choosing not to read books and things like this. Surely the mind is complacent. It's not dedicated, right? But then the Buddha, when he describes complacency, he talks about it all the way to the level is that if you had an unwholesome thought come up in your mind and you do nothing about it, that is complacency, right? Because like you're walking down the street and you see that there's this judgment of other people and looking down on other people. If you allow that to continue in the mind's complacent. You haven't applied right effort to cut that off and eliminate it. And you're not going to get to enlightenment if you just keep allowing your mind to stay wired that way where you're judging other people. Or if you had unwholesome thoughts when you're walking down the street and you have these unwholesome thoughts that are coming into your mind, if you do nothing about it, you're just allowing those thoughts and feelings to dwell, and your mind just stays wired that way. And you're not going to be able to get to enlightenment. And the mind is complacent in that situation. So you need to rise to your level of dedication and commitment to your own growth and development on the path where you're so diligent that even when you're just walking down the street by yourself and you notice that unwholesome thought, you apply right effort to cut it off and let it go. And what's going to allow you to do that is the 4 foundations of mindfulness. So that's why the Buddha says, for those students who practice these 4 foundations of mindfulness, they are the most dedicated because they're not allowing those unwholesome thoughts to be in the mind, and they're actually taking the effort to eliminate them out of the mind. And it's right mindfulness, or the 4 foundations of mindfulness, that's going to allow you to rise to that level of dedication. So let me know what questions you guys have here. Looks like Yusuf has a question. Go ahead, sir.
Unfortunately, I was one of these practitioners who practiced the wrong teachings, and that got me to become sick. I was like so restless that I got sick, and I went to hospital, and I wasn't able to speak, and I wasn't able to even like move my body, and I kept being sick for 3 days just because I was practicing the wrong teachings.
Okay. Do you have a question for me?
No, I just was about to share that. Now I have a question.
Okay.
I would first ask about Ananda and Buddha, then I would ask about 4 foundations. So I suspect that, I know you, and I suspect that if I were like attached to you, you would either tell me that I am so attached to you so that I can work on it, or like you would do maybe something to help me let go of that attachment. But as I have heard you, you said that Ananda, due to his attachment to the Buddha, did not get to enlightenment, but after the Buddha's death, he got to enlightenment. So why didn't the Buddha told Ananda to like maybe go away for a certain amount of time to let go of his attachments?
Yeah, no matter how well trained an individual is, like the Buddha would be very well trained, right? It's possible for a Buddha to not be able to see the attachment of their students, because the only person who can see their attachments 100% is the person themselves. So a teacher can't see 100% of their students' cravings, desires, attachments. So there are rare situations where a student can actually be attached and a Buddha wouldn't be able to see that. So the Buddha wouldn't necessarily have been able to see every situation where one of his students was attached to him. The Buddha used to do things during his lifetime that helped to ensure that his students wouldn't get attached to him, but they could still easily get attached. There's descriptions in the Pali Canon where the Buddha would be with a large congregation of his ordained practitioners, maybe several hundred of them, and they would all fall asleep at night. And the Buddha would end up waking up early and he would actually leave very early before everybody else woke up. And then they would wake up and the Buddha was gone, right? And he might not see those same people for like 3 months, right? And this is a wise thing for a teacher to do in that situation. But even still, in doing those kinds of things, it's possible for a student's mind to get attached, and the student doesn't see it, the teacher doesn't see it. And in this case with Ananda, he didn't see it, and it didn't become apparent until the Buddha got close to death. But then eventually Ananda did eliminate his attachment after the Buddha died. So it's possible for a student to have an attachment that a teacher doesn't see. That's why a teacher is here to guide you and help you look in the right direction. But you need to be your own island, right? That's what the Buddha is saying here. You need to be your own island. You need to be your own refuge. You can't be dependent on a teacher to point out your attachments for you. And it's the 4 foundations of mindfulness that are going to allow you to be able to do that.
Okay. So regarding mental objects, I have observed the mind. When I had a mental object, the craving or the feeling or the sensation, whatever, just immediately, to describe it, I immediately get aversion, I immediately get hatred and this kind of stuff, and it fades away quickly. And I think that this would be a mental object, because if it was maybe a feeling or something, I would have the thoughts occurring in the mind regarding that individual where I have hatred for him. But because the thought just does not arise, there is no thoughts arising in the mind, and there is no feeling, there is no bodily sensation, just like there is something deep down in the mind that is hatred, arise and then fades quickly. It's a little bit difficult to cut that because there is nothing to cut. It just arises and just fades, even though it could be so strong. I don't know how to describe it. Is that like a mental object, or I'm just confused?
Some of these mental objects do produce bodily sensations, and then it's going to become a feeling and affect the condition of the mind. Some of them do not, right? So like conceit typically doesn't have bodily sensations. A desire for form and desire for formless doesn't typically have bodily sensations. That's why the Buddha calls it out as something separate that you need to have awareness of. But you can't understand and have awareness of the mental objects if you don't know what they are. So you need to be able to understand what they are, the symptoms of them, how to eliminate them, and how to know that you've actually eliminated them. I teach that in the retreat that I share each August. And yes, these mental objects are more deeply rooted and more challenging to eliminate, but the one that you're talking about does produce bodily sensations, ill will, anger, hatred, ill will. That is a mental object, but it does produce bodily sensations. It affects the feelings, it forms feelings, and then it affects the condition of the mind. But in order to be able to know these mental objects and be able to eliminate them, you need to be able to first understand what they are. That's what you're actually purifying the mind of, is the mental objects. So while you're putting a blockade at the bodily sensations and cutting off and letting go there, no longer allowing the mind to form the conditioned feelings, all the while you're using all the other teachings of the Buddha to uproot these mental objects and purify them out of the mind. That's what produces enlightenment.
Mm.
Okay, I saw Pat had his hand up, but I think he doesn't any longer, so maybe your question got answered. Let me see if we have any other questions anywhere. Okay, so I don't see any other questions anywhere. So now we can go to this one, chapter 46. So someone who would like to read this one? I think it was Yusuf, actually. It was after Samantha. Go ahead, sir.
4 criteria that assure the words of the Buddha. Suppose a monk were to say, "Friends, I heard and received this from the perfectly enlightened one's own lips. These are the teachings. This is the discipline. This is the master's teachings. Then, monks, you should neither approve nor disapprove his words. Then, without approving or disapproving, his words and expressions should be carefully noted and compared with the suttas, discourses, and reviewed in the light of the discipline. If they, on such comparison and review, are found not to conform to the suttas, discourses, or the discipline, the conclusion must be, assuredly, this is not the word of the Buddha. It has been wrongly understood by this monk, and the matter is to be ignored. But where on such comparison or review they are found to conform to the suttas, discourses, or the discipline, the conclusion must be, assuredly, this is the word of the Buddha. It had been rightly understood by this monk. Suppose a monk were to say, in such and such a place, there is a community with elders and distinguished teachers. I have heard and received this from that community. Then, monks, you should neither approve nor disapprove his words. Suppose a monk were to say, in such and such a place, there are many elders who are learned, bearers of the tradition, who know the teachings, the discipline, the training, guidance. Suppose a monk were to say, in such and such a place, there is one elder who is learned. I have heard and received this from that elder, but where on such comparison and review they are found to confirm the suttas, discourses, and the discipline, then the conclusion must be, assuredly, this is the word of the Buddha. It has been rightly understood by this monk.
Okay, thank you, Yusuf. So what the Buddha is teaching you here is to not just believe what other people say about his teachings. That's what he's saying here, that suppose somebody says, hey, I heard this from the Buddha's own lips himself. He's saying don't approve or disapprove of that, meaning don't just believe in this just because someone said they heard it. Because if you've ever played that old telephone game where people sit in a big circle, you maybe have 10 or 20 people sitting in a circle, and you whisper to someone, the pink elephant jumped over the brown fence, and then everybody whispers it. By the time he gets around, it's like the yellow tiger jumped over the blue mountain, right? It's like completely opposite of what it was when the person first initiated it. So just because someone said, hey, I heard this from the Buddha's own lips, doesn't mean that they actually have understood what it is that the Buddha actually shared. So without approving or disapproving of what it is that you hear from other people, it's important to consult the suttas. And when you consult the suttas, if it's in conflict with what the Buddha shared, he's saying you should ignore that, right? Because that's just going to take you down a path of misunderstanding. But if upon consultation with the suttas, you see that it matches, he's saying, okay, you can understand that this person has rightly understood his teachings. But even there, you still don't believe what you're learning from the teachings of the Buddha. You learn, investigate, examine, you reflect, independently verify, and you practice. That's what's going to help you to cultivate wisdom. And then the Buddha takes this further and says, okay, say you've heard things from a certain elder. It's the same thing. Don't approve or disapprove, and just be sure that you consult the suttas. And as you do, if it conflicts with the teachings of the Buddha, then you know that this person is misunderstood, and you can ignore that. But if somebody has shared something with you that does compare and match up to what the Buddha teaches, then you can say, okay, they've rightly understood this, but now again, you still need to determine the truth for yourself, to be able to get to the wisdom. So let me know what questions you guys have here. This is the Buddha teaching you to really investigate and not just believe what people are saying about his teachings. Okay, looks like Yusuf has a question. Go ahead, sir.
Teacher, does the traditions that Buddhism have recognize the Pali Canon as the original teachings of the Buddha, or some of them say it is not?
The Theravada tradition does. Other traditions, not as much, but there's some people within those traditions that do consider the Pali Canon to be the words of the Buddha, but they're not always studying those, and they're also not always using reliable translations too. It's not just that you study the Pali Canon, it's that you use reliable translations, because you'll find translations that are very off. Like, for example, you'll see some translations that are quoting the Buddha as saying things like, you stupid fool, right? A Buddha doesn't speak that way. An enlightened being doesn't speak that way. They don't degrade and diminish other people. But if you were reading these kinds of translations, thinking that they're the words of the Buddha, you yourself might actually talk that way about other people and to other people. And you'll never get to enlightenment talking to somebody like that. So while these other traditions, they don't typically consider the Pali Canon to be the original words of the Buddha, there are some people within those traditions that do, and they supplement whatever it is that they're studying with the Pali Canon. But more so, what you're going to see in those traditions, and even in the Theravada tradition, is that people aren't studying with the original words of the Buddha. They're just studying some books or teachings that some ordained practitioner today is sharing, or that somebody in the recent past, like in the last 200 to 500 years, they're going to study their teachings instead of the Buddha himself.
So if I were to tell you something, you would compare it to the Pali Canon to see if it is true or not. But to what would they compare it to see is it true or false?
They wouldn't. They're not taught to learn, reflect, and practice. They're taught to believe. They're taught to worship. They're taught to do rituals and prayers and things like this. So they're not actually working to cultivate wisdom. Oftentimes they're doing what we studied in some previous chapters where they're just listening to maybe poetry. It's almost like just easy on the ears. It doesn't require them to do anything. Where the teachings of the Buddha and the Pali Canon, it requires you to do something. You've got to learn, reflect, and practice, and that's challenging. The learning and reflecting is challenging enough, but the practice part is really challenging. So oftentimes when people hear these things and find these things in the Pali Canon, they're not interested in doing that work because the mind is so complacent due to its sensual desire. Okay, so I don't see any questions anywhere. So now we'll go to the next one. Is there someone who would like to read this one? Okay, I've got several people here. I'll go ahead and take Yihang since she hasn't read yet. She was the first one too.
Thank you, Teacher David. The supreme honor and respect, Ananda, prepare me a bed between these twin saw trees with my head to the north. I am sleepy and would like to lie down. Ananda, these saw trees have burst forth into an abundance of untimely blossoms, which fell upon the Tathagata's body, sprinkling it and covering it in homage. Divine coral tree flowers fell from the sky. Divine sandalwood powder fell from the sky, sprinkling and covering the Tathagata's body in homage. Divine music and song sound from the sky in homage to the Tathagata. Never before has the Tathagata been so honored, respected, appreciated, admired, and adored. And yet Ananda, whatever male or female ordained practitioner, male or female household practitioner resides practicing the teachings properly and perfectly fulfills the way of the teachings, he or she honors the Tathagata, has deep respect and appreciates him and pays him the supreme homage. Therefore, Ananda, we will reside practicing the teachings properly and perfectly fulfill the way of the teachings. This must be your goal and objective. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Yihang. So imagine this, that here's the Buddha, out somewhere, and here's one of his close students, and there's this essential miracle that is occurring, right? The Buddha didn't create this, it just occurs, right? And what he does is he uses it immediately to help share a teaching. He doesn't puff out his chest like, wow, look at me, look how great I am, that this miracle has occurred around me, right? That's not what a Buddha is going to do. That's not what an enlightened being is going to do. They're interested in seeing the teachings continue in the world. And the way that a Buddha's teachings continue in the world is through the hearts and the minds of countless people. Nowadays we have books and all these different resources to capture the teachings and preserve them. But that in and of itself isn't enough to actually preserve the teachings. They need to actually be preserved in the person's mind. By more and more people getting to enlightenment, by countless people getting to enlightenment, that's what's going to preserve the teachings. Because once you get to enlightenment, you'll never forget the wisdom that it took for you to get there. And a Buddha's number one goal is to be able to help as many people get to enlightenment as possible. They're not interested in fame or fortune or any of these other kinds of things. They're purely interested in seeing countless people get to enlightenment. So everything that they do is going to be guided towards helping people get to enlightenment. And here you can see, even when there's this essential miracle that is being performed, that the Buddha uses it as a teaching. And he says, hey, if you really would like to respect me, learn and practice the teachings. That's the way to show deep respect to a teacher. And whether it's a Buddha, or even if you had a teacher that was teaching you how to do sewing or knitting or electrical work or construction or something like this, the way to honor and respect that teacher for the time and effort to teach you is to practice what it is that they teach you, right? So here the Buddha makes that very clear, but there's also another place in his teachings where he was asked specifically, like, what's the best way to respect you as a teacher? And he said to learn and practice the teachings, because that's what a Buddha ultimately is looking to accomplish, is for countless people to get to enlightenment, because that's what preserves the teachings in the mind of the individual students as they get to enlightenment. So let me know what questions you guys have on this chapter. Okay, I don't see any questions. So now we go to chapter 48. So someone who would like to read this? Okay, Mr. Yusuf, go ahead, sir.
Teachings and discipline will be your teacher. Ananda, it may be that you will think the teacher's instruction has ceased. Now we have no teacher. It should not be seen like this, Ananda. For what I have taught and explained to you as teachings and discipline will, at my passing, be your teacher. Now, monks, I declare to you, all conditioned things are of a nature to decay, strive on untiringly. These were the Tathagata's last words.
Okay, so the Buddha's death occurred about 3 months after that initial discourse that we were talking about, where he was sharing with people that he was going to die. And he made his last words an actual teaching that is describing his very first teaching. What he's describing here is the universal truth of impermanence. He's saying all conditioned things are of a nature to decay. That's talking about the universal truth of impermanence. Strive on untiringly, meaning continue to be dedicated and determined to be able to get to enlightenment yourself. That it's his instructions and his teachings that he explained during his life that are going to guide you on this path now that he's died, right? So he actually died amongst some of his students. In this particular chapter down here, after I describe, final enlightenment and what happens at death and things like this, eventually what you get to is you get to this article about how did the Buddha die. It was written by this doctor who was actually a doctor prior to ordaining. And you can read this because he goes through the discourses and he basically tracks exactly the symptoms that the Buddha was having and what actually led to his death. Because oftentimes people have the misunderstanding that the Buddha died from eating a poisonous sandwich. You might hear this from time to time. It's kind of comical, but yet it's not, because it's really unfortunate that people think that way, that people think that the Buddha was at a party, he knew that there was this poisonous sandwich, and that he didn't want anybody else to eat it, so he ate it himself. That's essentially like committing suicide. Now, here's this wise individual that has gotten to enlightenment. What would you do if you were at a party and you knew that there was a poisonous sandwich on the table and other people might eat it? What would you do? You'd probably pick it up and throw it away, right? Maybe even bury it in the ground somewhere, right? So make sure nobody would surely eat it, right? That's what you would do. And you're not yet a enlightened being, perhaps, right? And you're surely not a fully perfectly enlightened Buddha. So the idea of a Buddha eating a sandwich in order to kill himself so that other people wouldn't eat the sandwich, it's preposterous, right? If you read this article, you'll be able to see what he died of. He essentially died of old age, but more specifically, it talks about how his stomach lining was, kind of pulled and ripped and torn just from, being used for all those years. He was 80 years old, but essentially his body physically gave out. But you can read this article because it was very well written and really traces each individual aspect of what was going on during the lifetime of the Buddha over multiple discourses, because this doctor had to be able to look at all the different evidence And with his medical background, he was able to trace it to a specific thing that actually could have caused the death of the Buddha. So here the Buddha is wisely knowing that his last words are going to be understood and remembered. And he uses his very last sentence to teach his very first teaching that would help somebody get on the path to enlightenment, because he still has compassion and loving kindness for the entire world, aspiring for countless people to get to enlightenment. So he uses his very last words to be able to help people to understand the very first teaching of getting on the path to enlightenment. So let me know what questions you guys have here. Remember, you can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or in Zoom. Okay, I don't see any questions anywhere. So now, after we get past all of this content, which you guys are welcome to read, we'll get to chapter 49. Would somebody like to read this one? Okay, Leo, go ahead, sir.
Ordained practitioners. The perfectly enlightened one and the male ordained community were honored, respected, admired, venerated, and appreciated, and they obtained robes, arms, food, lodgings, and medical supplies. But the wanderers of other communities were not. There was a wanderer named Susima, who was advised by his company to lead the holy life under the ascetic Gotama, to master the teachings and share the teachings with household practitioners in hope that they too will be honored, respected, and admired. Upon receiving ordination, the wanderer Susima asked the venerable ones if they willed various kinds of spiritual power, but was told that it is not necessary to obtain spiritual power to attain Nibbana. The wanderer Susima then went to the perfectly enlightened one and reported to him the conversation he had with the monks. Then the perfectly enlightened one shared teachings, and the wanderer Susima attained enlightenment. Then the venerable Susima prostrated himself with his head at the perfectly enlightened one's feet and said, "Venerable Sir, I have committed a wrongdoing in that I was so unwise, so confused, so unskillful, that I went forth as a thief of the teachings in such a well-expounded teachings and discipline as this. Venerable Sir, may the perfectly enlightened one pardon me for my wrongdoing, seen as a wrongdoing for the sake of future restraint. Surely, Susima, you have done a wrongdoing in that you were so unwise, so confused, so unskillful, that you went forth as a thief of the teachings in such a well-expounded teachings and disciples as this. Suppose, Susima, they were to arrest the bandit, the criminal, and bring him before the king, saying, Sir, this man is a bandit, a criminal. Impose on him whatever punishment you wish. The king would say so to them, Come, man, bind this man's arms tightly behind his neck with a strong rope, shave his head, and lead him around from street to street and from square to square, beating a drum. Then take him out through the southern gate and to the south of the city, cut off his head. What do you think, Susima? Would that man experience pain and displeasure on that account? Yes, Venerable Sir. Although that man would experience pain and displeasure on that account, going forth as a thief of the teachings is such a well-expounded teachings and disciple, as this has results that are far more painful, far more bitter, and further, it leads to the nether world. But since you see your wrongdoing as a wrongdoing and apologize for it in accordance with the teachings, we understand you. For it is growth in the noble one's disciple, discipline when one sees one's wrongdoing as a wrongdoing, makes apologize for it in accordance with the teachings, and undertakes future restraint.
Okay, let me talk about this.
Among-
Let me talk about this, Leo, and then we can go into this next part. So here, what the Buddha is talking about is there's a certain student who was part of another community, and this individual ended up taking the teachings of the Buddha and essentially declaring them as their own. And the Buddha calls this type of individual a thief, right? Because they don't fully, really, truly understand the teachings, or else they wouldn't attempt to steal the teachings and claim it as their own. But they were teaching them to a certain degree and claiming it as their own. But this individual understood that this was unwise and came back to the Buddha and apologized. And the Buddha said, okay, I understand you, right? Because the Buddha is not going to condemn somebody or look down on somebody. They're just going to understand that this is what the mind does when it has pollution of craving, anger, and ignorance. So the Buddha just says, okay, I understand. But then he gives this analogy of having someone's head cut off due to being a thief. And he says essentially that the pain and the unwholesome consequences that you experience because of stealing the teachings is much greater than that. Because in that situation, somebody's head was cut off and sure, it hurt in that one situation. But here the Buddha is talking about stealing the teachings is far more painful because it leads to the netherworld. That's the lower realms. Because once you're in the lower realms, you're going to have to experience constant rebirths over and over and over and over and over again, experiencing constant pain. So that's why it's more significant than just having your head cut off that one time. So let's go to this next one. Leo, if you'd like to keep reading, you're more than welcome to, but if you need a break, we can get somebody else.
I can do it.
Okay.
A monk's conduct when entering houses. There are several ways of conduct for monks when entering houses, as appears in many discourses. In summary, they are how to eat, how to give thanks, and how to talk on the teachings, as examples shown in the following discourse. Then, it being morning, the perfectly enlightened Kassapa, accomplished and fully enlightened, dressed and taking his bowl and outer robe, he went with the community of monks to the residence of King Kiki of Kasi, and sat down on the seat made ready for him. Then with his own hands, King Kiki of Kasi served and satisfied the community of monks heated by the Buddha Kassapa with various kinds of good food. When the Buddha Kassapa, accomplished and fully enlightened, had eaten and had put his bowl aside, King Kiki of Kasi took a low seat, sat down at one side and said, "Venerable Sir, let the perfectly enlightened one accept from me the residence of the reigns in retreat. There will be such service to the community. Enough, King, my residence for the reign has already been provided for." Then the perfectly enlightened one, rising up early and taking his bowl and robe, came up to the residence of the Brahmin of Varanja. Having come up together with a company of monks, he sat down on the appointed seat. Then the Brahmin of Varanja, having served with his own hand abundant food, both hard and soft, to the company of monks with the perfectly enlightened one as their heat, and having satisfied them, when the perfectly enlightened one had eaten and had finished his meal, he clothed him with the threefold robes, and he clothed each monk with a set of garments. Then the perfectly enlightened one, having instructed roast, gladdened, and delighted the Brahmin of Varanja with talk on the teachings, rose from his seat and departed. And the perfectly enlightened one, having risen early, went with robe and bowl and attended by his monks to Kuttadanta's place of sacrifice and sat down on the prepared seat. And Kuttadanda served the Buddha and his monks with the finest foods with his own hands until they were satisfied. And when the perfectly enlightened one had eaten and taken his hands away from the bowl, Kuttadanta took a low stool and sat down to one side. Then the perfectly enlightened one, having instructed Kuttadanda with a talk on the teachings, inspired him, aroused him with enthusiasm, and delighted him, rose from his seat and departed. When he has eaten, he sits in silence for a while, but he does not let the time for the thanks go by. When he has eaten and gives thanks, he does not do so criticizing the meal or expecting another meal. Instructs, urges, rouses, and gladdens that audience with talk purely on the teachings. When he has done so, he rises from his seat and departs. He walks neither too fast nor too slow, and he does not go as one who wants to get away.
Okay, so let's talk about this for a second. What an individual can gather from this is that as an ordained practitioner, when they're receiving offerings, what the Buddha teaches that you give back in return is teachings. That's the exchange that is happening. That's the mutual support. And not just with an ordained practitioner, but if there was a teacher who was leading a community, if people are making offerings to that person, it would be wise for them to give teachings back to the community. That's how the community is going to learn and grow and develop in the path. And also that individual who's being supported by a community, it would be wise to give thanks. Sometimes you see people that are receiving support from a community, they don't even say thank you to the people around them. And those people are typically struggling to get the support that they need. And this is the reason why, is because they're not showing appreciation and gratitude to the people who are supporting them. So the Buddha is helping to be able to share with you, if you're choosing to teach or be an ordained practitioner, that sure, you're accepting offerings, but you're also giving the teachings back. And it's important to give thanks as part of that. Even though you're giving teachings, you shouldn't feel like you deserve this offering or that you should expect this offering. You can see that he talks about here that this person doesn't criticize the meal or expect another meal, right? There's no expectation that this person is given a meal in that situation, but that doesn't mean they're going to give you a meal in the future as well. Instead, just be thankful for what has been given, provide teachings to help those people, and then move on, right? Move on, neither too fast or too slow, and just slowly walk away. That's what the Buddha is talking about here, that once things are done, then you just move on and not continuing to cling or hold on. So now we've got this next one. Leo, got a little bit left here. Would you like to read this?
No, if it's not so much, I can.
Okay.
Okay. What should monks do when in the midst of the community? In the midst of the community, he does not engage in rambling and pointless talk. Either he himself speaks on the teachings, or he requests someone else to do so, or he adopts noble silence. This is the seventh cause and condition that leads to obtaining the wisdom fundamental to the spiritual life when it has not been obtained, and to its increase, maturation, and fulfillment by development after it has been obtained. This was taken from the 8 causes and conditions that lead to obtaining the wisdom fundamental to the spiritual life when it has not been obtained. Good monks, it is fitting for you clansmen who have gone out of confidence from the home life into homelessness, to sit together to discuss the teachings when you gather with the teachings. When you gather together, monks, you should do either of 2 things: hold discussions on the teachings or maintain no silence.
Okay. Thank you, Leo. So once again, the Buddha is sharing that, okay, the objective here for the ordained community is to share the teachings to help other people to get to enlightenment. And that's what an individual would be focused on if they're practicing the teachings in the way that the Buddha shared. That as you go into this life of homelessness as an ordained practitioner, you need to learn and grow and develop yourself. But at some point, you start to transition over to sharing the teachings with others. And the Buddha says, okay, when you guys get together, basically hold discussions on these teachings. That's encouraged because it brings the teachings up to the forefront of the mind, or this noble silence, right? And this is for ordained practitioners who are living off of the dedicated offerings from the community. So let me know what questions you guys have on any of these chapters that Leo just read and that I explained. You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask questions that way. Okay, Yusuf, you have a question.
So sometimes when people ask me for advice and I give them the advice and they become like, wow, it's so reasonable, and they ask more and more and more and more. So eventually they ask and say, from where or how did you learn such things? And when I mention that it is from the Buddha, they become judgmental, saying that I maybe worship the Buddha and he's my God and this kind of stuff. So is there a way to not say that I have learned them from the Buddha without stealing them, like making them my own?
You could ask them a question, right? When they say, where did you learn these things? You might say, does it matter where they were learned from? What's important is that they're going to be helpful and beneficial for you to learn and grow and develop. It's wise to let people know that they're from the Buddha, but you could say this other thing. The only reason why you maybe are considering to not attribute them to the Buddha is that your mind doesn't like it when they criticize you and judge you. But you need to get to the point where you don't have that uncomfortableness in the mind based on people functioning in that way.
So I don't see myself like having craving for them to not criticize me, but even my closest ones who really, really appreciate me giving advice and continuously asks for one, they still accuse me of insanity, becoming insane. So like I asked you to for a way to like not open this door for them to accuse me of insanity, because just there's no need if they are getting benefit from my advices.
So if they accused you of insanity, but yet at the front side, they're very intrigued and interested in the teachings, and then you share that it's from the Buddha and they say, wow, you're so obscene, you're so insane, you're so obsessed, I would just smile and walk away. That's what I would do.
Okay, I have a question also about the
one other thing. Yusuf, you can also say to them, you can say, that's very unfortunate that you think that way, and then you could just choose to walk away also as well. Right?
Okay, I have also a question about the four foundations. Sometimes there would be a craving in the mind that no matter how much I cut it off or let it go, it slowly turns into a condition of the mind, like slowly. So to redirecting my mind does not work sometimes on such cravings. The only way I have seen that works regard of redirecting the mind, which is going out with my friends, because my mind would be so distracted, it would fade away. But due to impermanence, sometimes this is not optional. So you have any way to redirect my mind that would be beneficial to such a craving?
So the redirecting the mind and cutting off and letting go isn't going to work every single time because their mind isn't fully matured. It's not fully developed. It's not until you get into the stages of enlightenment that it's going to work every single time. But you need to work in that direction. So you need to keep doing the redirection. You need to keep trying to cut off and let go, understanding that it's not going to work all the time because the mind isn't fully developed. But there's no other thing that you would be wise to do. Instead, keep doing what it is that the Buddha teaches you to do, because you're working more and more to develop that internal mechanism to cut off. But also, I don't think you're meditating every day yet. I don't think you're doing 2 or 3 meditations a day. I don't think you're practicing generosity every day. These are all things that you need to be able to develop in order to mature the mind. So that's the reason why your mind isn't yet able to cut off and let go, because you don't have the full development of the Eightfold Path yet. So there's not like some other thing that you would do other than the Eightfold Path. You need to be able to implement that fully, and that's what's going to allow you to cut off and let go.
Okay, understood.
Mm-hmm. All right. Let me see if we have any other questions. I don't see anything anywhere. So let's go to the last chapter for today. Oops. Here we are right here. This is chapter 50. Let me just see something. It looks like Pat is interested in reading this one. Wow, this is really, really, really long. Let's see what we've got here. All right. Go ahead, Pat. Oh, did you still would like to read, Pat? We'll probably read part of it, but we're just not going to read all of it. If you'd like to read.
Things monks should give high consideration. Those acting for the peacefulness of suffering of many people, or peacefulness or suffering of many people. First discourse. Monks, possessing three qualities, a well-known monk is acting for the harm of many people, for the unhappiness of many people, for the ruin, harm, and suffering of many people, of heavenly beings and human beings. What three? He encourages them in unwholesome bodily action, unwholesome verbal action, and unwholesome mental qualities. Possessing these three qualities, a well-known monk is acting for the harm of many people, for the unhappiness of many people, for the ruin, harm, and suffering of many people, of heavenly beings and human beings. Monks, possessing three qualities, a well-known monk is acting for the welfare of many people, for the peacefulness of many people, for the good welfare and peacefulness of many people, of heavenly beings and human beings. What three? He encourages them in wholesome bodily action, wholesome verbal action, and wholesome mental qualities. Possessing these three qualities, a well-known monk is acting for the welfare of many people, for the peacefulness of many people, for the good welfare and peacefulness of many people, of heavenly beings and human beings.
Okay, thank you, Pat. So we'll just talk about this one, and then we'll see what other ones we've got here. This one is pretty self-explanatory, that the Buddha is saying, like, hey, there's ordained practitioners that could be influencing unwholesome things and those that are influencing wholesome things. And of course, if you were ordained, you'd be interested in encouraging wholesome things, because that's what's going to help the people around you. But remember, this is a chapter for ordained practitioners, but you can also think about this in terms of your friends and family, right? Like if people are using profanity and drugs and alcohol and doing unwholesome things and stuff like this, you're not interested in encouraging that. You're instead interested in encouraging wholesome things. So where you see people doing wholesome things, it would be wise to encourage those. Where you see people doing unwholesome things, it doesn't necessarily mean you should step in and say anything to those people. But when you see people doing wholesome things, it's wise to encourage that. And you're going to see more and more of those kinds of things that are happening around you. So this is a discourse for ordained practitioners, of course, but you can implement this into your life as well, because then whether it's neighbors, coworkers, friends, family, acquaintances, you can be always encouraging positive and wholesome things to occur. So here, this is another one, which is another discourse, which is essentially very similar. Let's just read this one, and then we'll just end our class with this one. Pat, you're welcome to read this one if you like.
Though acting for the peacefulness or suffering of many people, second discourse. Monks, possessing five qualities, an elder monk is acting for the harm of many people, for the unhappiness of many people, for the ruin, harm, and suffering of many people, of heavenly beings and humans. What five? 1, an elder is of long standing, has long gone forth. 2, he is well known and famous and has a community of many people, including household practitioners and ordained practitioners. 3, he gains robes, alms food, lodgings, and medicines and provisions for the sick. 4, he has learned much, remembers what he has learned, and accumulates what he has learned. Those teachings that are good in the beginning, good in the middle, and good in the end, with the right meaning and phrasing, which proclaim the perfectly complete and pure spiritual life. Such teachings as these he has learned much of, retained in mind, recited verbally, mentally investigated, and penetrated well by view. 5, he holds wrong view and has a distorted perspective. He draws many people away from the wholesome teachings and establishes them in unwholesome teachings. Thinking, the elder monk is of long standing and has long gone forth. They follow his example. Thinking, the elder monk is well known and famous and has a community of many people, including household practitioners and ordained practitioners. They follow his example. Thinking, the elder monk gains robes, alms food, lodgings, and medicines and provisions for the sick. They follow his example, thinking. The elder monk has learned much, remembers what he has learned, and accumulates what he has learned. They follow his example. Possessing these 5 qualities, an elder monk is acting for the harm of many people, for the unhappiness of many people, for the ruin, harm, and suffering of many people, of heavenly beings and humans. Monks, possessing 5 other qualities, an elder monk is acting for the welfare of many people, for the peacefulness of many people, for the good, welfare, and peacefulness of many people, of heavenly beings and human beings. What 5? 1. An elder is of long standing and has long gone forth. 2. He is well known and famous and has a community of many people, including household practitioners and ordained practitioners. 3. He gains robes, alms food, lodgings, and medicines and provisions for the sick. 4. He has learned much, remembers what he has learned, and accumulates what he has learned. Those teachings that are good in the beginning, good in the middle, and good in the end, with the right meaning and phrasing, which proclaim the perfectly complete and pure spiritual life. Such teachings as these he has learned much of, retained in mind, recited verbally, mentally investigated, and penetrated well by view. 5. He holds right view and has a correct perspective. He draws many people away from unwholesome teachings and establishes them in the wholesome teachings. Thinking. The elder monk is of long standing and has long gone forth. They follow his example. Thinking. The elder monk is well known and famous and has a community of many people, including household practitioners and ordained practitioners. They follow his example. Thinking. The elder monk gains robes, alms food, lodgings, and medicines and provisions for the sick. They follow his example. Thinking. The elder monk has learned much, remembers what he has learned, and accumulates what he has learned. They follow his example. Possessing these 5 qualities, an elder monk is acting for the welfare of many people, for the peacefulness of many people, for the good, welfare, and peacefulness of many people, of heavenly beings and humans. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Pat. So again, I think this discourse is very self-explanatory. And helps you to be able to see what the Buddha is guiding ordained practitioners to be able to do. That he guided them to be able to help people to improve the condition of their mind and their life by producing more and more wholesomeness and purifying the mind through training of the mind. But there are individuals who are maybe ordained, who have these large communities that maybe are not teaching those things, and they're into unwholesome things, and they're guiding people towards those things. And that would be unwise for somebody to do, but there are individuals who do those kinds of things. So whether you're ordained or not, you would be interested in doing wholesome things. And as an ordained practitioner, you would like to be doing more and more wholesome things as well. So again, I think this is pretty self-explanatory, but if you guys have questions on this, you're welcome to ask it. And there's also these others as well that you guys might have read prior to class, that you're welcome to ask questions about any of these as well that we're not actually covering as part of the class. So it looks like Samantha has a question. So go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you. I have a question for the first discourse. You said to encourage wholesome actions, but you didn't say anything about discouraging unwholesome. So would you only do that if you had, say, the 5 factors of right speech in hand, such as the person being receptive to it, and the other 4 factors? Or is it best just not to say anything about unwholesome actions?
What you'll find is the more that you enhance the positive or the wholesome, you won't really be needing to talk about any of the unwholesome. This goes for family and friends and all these kinds of things. So like, for example, one of the things that we've been trying to help my son with is to learn to take initiative on his own to wash dishes or to take down clothes off the drying area and stuff like this. And, you know, he pretty much doesn't do it unless he's asked. But the last 2 weeks, he chose to do it on his own without me ever asking him. So when I saw that he did that, I was like, oh, wow, that's really wonderful that you did that. That was a really wise decision. So the more that you enhance the positive, you'll see that people will tend to do those things more readily, and you won't have to talk about the unwholesome very much. But there are some occasions where you could be wise to talk about the unwholesome or, address it. And the Buddha shares that if there's people who are close to you that will heed your advice, particularly like your parents, your brothers and sisters, your life partner, your children, of course, these kinds of people. But you need to be really careful in how you do this because you need to make sure your conceit isn't involved. And you need to make sure that you don't have sensual desire and ill will involved there too. And you need to be very skillful, yes, with right speech, making sure that you're doing that because you can come off as preachy, as judgmental. So you need to find very skillful ways to be able to do this. And you're going to make mistakes when you first start doing this, but that can lead to helping you to be able to do it better. But I encourage people to really practice the teachings closely themselves and really focus on that for a good long while before they ever start potentially trying to help other people. And typically when you are trying to help other people and they're doing things that are unwholesome, you might try to do this once or twice or even 3 times over the course of a year or 2. And if the person's not receptive to what you're doing, it's better to just not even address it, because whatever they're choosing to do unwholesome, it's going to affect them. And you can just make sure that you're not affected by their unwise decisions. Rather than having a craving to kind of fix this person, you would then be trying to, kind of put expectations on them. So typically you try to help someone, but you need to be able to do that skillfully, without conceit, without sensual desire, without ill will. And you'd like to space that out and just kind of see how receptive they are to it before you would continue to do those kinds of things.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, let me see here. I don't see any questions anywhere else. So what I'm going to do then is just end class by thanking all of you guys for joining. Thank you for reading. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for even just participating in the class and being interested to learn and grow and develop. Next week, we're going to be in the next set of chapters. Next week, of course, we're going to be starting at chapter 51, but we're going to go all the way through the end of the book, which I think is chapter 64. So if you'd like to read all of those prior to class, that'll prepare you for our class next week. Tomorrow in the group learning program, I'm going to be teaching chapter 17 from our book, Developing a Life Practice, The Path That Leads to Enlightenment. This chapter is titled Eliminating Fears. Are you really scared? This is where I help students to be able to understand how to eliminate their fear, because by the time you get to enlightenment, you don't have any fear at all, even the fear of your own death or fear of spiders or snakes or heights or any of these other kinds of things. You can eliminate all of that. So I'm going to be teaching that tomorrow at 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. Thai time. And then, of course, here in Chiang Mai, we've got our 6:30 p.m. meditation in the main hall at Wat Tong Yu. So you're always welcome to join that as well. And then on Wednesday, I'll be doing meditation with students and opening up to any questions that you guys have at 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. Thai time. So thank you all for joining. Thank you for everything that you do to learn and practice these teachings. I really appreciate your help in helping people to be able to understand that there's these teachings out there, that there's, yes, so many misunderstandings, but there's teachings that are available for people to truly understand the true path. And the best way that you can do that is by learning and practicing them yourself, and not necessarily having to go out and actively share them with other people, but just by learning and practicing them yourself. That's the very best thing you could ever do for yourself, those close to you, and all of the world. And as you saw today, it's the very best way to respect the Buddha is by learning and practicing his teachings. So thank you for that. So perhaps we'll see you guys in a future class. Be well and take care. Sawadee krap.
Thank you again for watching. Enjoy your meditation. Look forward to seeing you online and answering any questions that you might have. Thank you so much.